These are 13 movies from 1986 that lost Hollywood hundreds of millions of dollars and ended careers overnight. From George Lucas's Duck Disaster to Roman Polanski's Pirate Catastrophe, this became the year that bankrupted studios, destroyed the British film industry, and proved that even the biggest names in entertainment could fail spectacularly. Even horror fans have forgotten this one existed, and that tells you everything you need to know about Link. Released in 1986, this killer chimpanzee thriller vanished from theaters almost as quickly as it arrived, leaving barely a trace behind. Richard Franklin had developed this project since 1979, describing his vision as a sort of Jaws with chimps. Elizabeth Shue starred as an American zoology student, taking a summer job with an eccentric British professor played by Terence Stamp, whose 45-year-old former circus chimp becomes murderously aggressive after learning he's scheduled to be put down. Here's where it gets deceptive. Despite the script specifically calling for a chimpanzee, the production used an orangutan named Locke with dyed fur and prosthetic ears glued on to sell the illusion. Franklin faced enormous pressure to use men in suits but refused outright, calling that approach dishonest to audiences. Real troubles began when Thorn EMI got taken over by Cannon Group, and the new owners immediately hacked the film apart. 8 minutes came out for America, another 5 for Britain, and Franklin compared the experience to watching the horse suffer in Black Beauty. $6 million went into producing Link, and less than $2 million came back domestically. Shue herself later called it a not great horror movie, which counts as generous. Obscurity swallowed the film until Kino Lorber released a 4K restoration in 2024. Tobe Hooper's doomed 3-picture deal with Cannon Films produced its second disaster with Invaders from Mars. After Life Force flopped in 1985, Cannon slashed the budget for this remake from $12 million down to just $7 million. Karen Black and Hunter Carson headlined the cast, with Louise Fletcher and Timothy Bottoms filling supporting roles. Talented screenwriters like Dan O'Bannon and visual effects legends Stan Winston and John Dykstra couldn't save a production troubled from day one, and Cannon founders Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus reportedly hated what they saw, claiming the finished product looked nothing like what they'd been promised. June 6, 1986 brought the film to theaters, where it opened in 7th place and grossed less than $5 million total. Variety's review called it an embarrassing combination of kitsch and boredom with an inferior screenplay that failed to provide interesting dialogue, and Razzie nominations followed for Worst Supporting Actress and Worst Visual Effects. Clever tributes to the 1953 original couldn't rescue the production. Jimmy Hunt from that version appeared as the police chief, and the school bore the name of original director William Cameron Menzies. But none of these Easter eggs translated to ticket sales. Hooper's 3 Cannon films carried budgets totaling over $40 million and brought back only about $25 million combined, and that's when his Hollywood career effectively ended. Absolute Beginners didn't just fail at the box office, it destroyed the British film industry entirely, and Goldcrest executive Jake Eberts called it an object lesson in how not to produce a movie. Eddie O'Connell and Patsy Kensit starred in this musical alongside David Bowie, James Fox, and Sade Adu. Director Julian Temple had already gone £1 million over budget before cameras even rolled. The script never got finalized during production, and then an electrical fire destroyed an expensive soundstage. Temple got fired from editing, and that's when Goldcrest brought in 3 different editors who spent 4 months cutting the film apart. Temple received only 2 weeks to salvage the wreckage, and Eberts later wrote that at every stage from conception through distribution, the film demonstrated exactly what not to do. £8.5 million went into production. $500,000 came back in UK rentals, and American theaters returned barely $900,000 while playing on only 4 screens at widest release. Consequences hit Temple hard. By 2016, he admitted the film remained an albatross around his neck, explaining that he couldn't get work in Britain and had to emigrate entirely. Martin Scorsese helped him get a green card because Temple had become the man blamed for destroying an entire national cinema industry. David Bowie's title track reached number 2 in the UK, and critics now consider it among the best work of his post-Let's Dance era. Audiences were asked to believe Kong survived his 1976 fall from the World Trade Center, and King Kong Lives built an entire movie around that absurd premise. 10 years later, the giant ape awakens from a coma after receiving an artificial heart and blood transfusion from a newly discovered female Kong, and the two escape, fall in love, and have a baby together. Linda Hamilton and Brian Kerwin starred under John Gillerman's direction, with the budget running somewhere between $10 and $18 million. Dino De Laurentiis sold sequel rights to his own company for $21 million before release, a transaction that lawyers cited in lawsuits later. No critics received advanced screenings, which never signals confidence. Siskel recalled on their Worst of 1986 special that watching kids swing an auditorium door proved more entertaining than the movie itself. Less than $5 million came back domestically, around $17 million worldwide, and Guillermin never directed another theatrical film. Peter Weller turned down a role to make RoboCop instead, and that decision defined his entire career going forward. DEG's collapse accelerated from here, leading to Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing in August 1988. 20 years in development couldn't save Tai-Pan from becoming one of 1986's biggest disasters. James Clavell's best-selling 1966 novel had been announced for adaptation multiple times with various stars attached, including Patrick McGoohan in the late 1960s, and Sean Connery turned down the lead when Dino De Laurentiis finally got cameras rolling. Brian Brown and Joan Chen starred with Daryl Duke directing, and the production claimed distinction as the first English-language film shot in mainland China. That distinction proved disastrous. Constant battles with communist censorship forced changes to portions of the story deemed offensive, while DEG fought with government officials and labor boards throughout shooting as red tape and bureaucratic delays plagued every aspect of production. De Laurentiis later admitted filming in China counted as a big mistake. Clavell himself told reporters he hadn't seen the finished film because it hadn't been convenient, which speaks volumes about his confidence in the adaptation. $25 million of production budget returned barely $4 million domestically. Roger Ebert compared it to old movie posters with titles hewn from solid rock, while the New York Times called it ridiculous but in a big way, describing 2 hours of super comics. Joan Chen collected Razzie nominations for both Worst Actress and Worst New Star. Duke believed a miniseries format would have worked better, similar to the successful Shogun adaptation, and the 1988 miniseries Noble House proved him right. Mel Brooks nearly went bankrupt because of Solarbabies, a science fiction film starring Jason Patric, Jamie Gertz, and Lucas Haas as orphaned teenagers in a post-apocalyptic future who discover a magical glowing orb called Bodhi while playing roller hockey. $5 million represented the starting budget. $25 million became the final number after weather destroyed sets. Unusable footage required reshoots, and general mismanagement consumed resources at every turn. Brooks described his desperation in a 2016 interview, explaining that he took out a second mortgage on his house and put up his cars as collateral. He admitted feeling practically ready to jump off a roof and confessed to creating what he called a phony baloney Star Wars trailer to sell the project to MGM. $9 million of his own money disappeared into the production. What saved Brooks from financial ruin turned out to be The Fly, which Brooks Films also produced in 1986. That film earned $60 million against a $15 million budget, allowing him to stay solvent despite Solarbabies returning barely $1.5 million. Leonard Maltin assigned his lowest rating. Gene Siskel called it trash. Roger Ebert described it as derivative, unimaginative, and desperate. Marketing costs pushed estimated losses between $38 and $61 million. $40 million spent and just over $1.5 million earned domestically makes Pirates the biggest percentage loss of 1986. Roman Polanski's passion project became a legendary disaster that took nearly a decade to reach screens. Polanski conceived the idea in 1976 after visiting Disneyland's Pirates of the Caribbean ride, originally intending Jack Nicholson for Captain Red, while casting himself as the sidekick Frog. Legal troubles forced Polanski to flee America, which derailed everything for years. Spending reached extraordinary levels once production began. Up to $8 million went toward building a full-scale galleon called the Neptune, consuming nearly a quarter of the entire budget, while another $10 million constructed sound stages in Tunisia. Walter Matthau and Polanski each collected $1 million salaries. Matthau expressed reservations openly, admitting he didn't understand the script and didn't think it came across as funny or adventurous. Swimming, climbing, and dueling in Tunisia for months didn't appeal to him at all, but his son convinced him to take the role anyway for the chance to work with a great director. Cannes Film Festival opened with the Neptune sailing into harbor, while cast members wore pirate costumes and reviews devastated the production. An Oscar nomination for Best Costume Design represented the only recognition. Canon co-founder Yoram Globus admitted pirates counted as a mistake that contributed to the company's $60 million loss and eventual bankruptcy. The Neptune sat abandoned in Cannes Harbor for 16 years before becoming a floating museum in Genoa, and pirate movies essentially disappeared until Pirates of the Caribbean revived the genre in 2003. Stephen King's only directorial attempt became something he's spent decades apologizing for, and Maximum Overdrive earned every bit of criticism thrown at it. Emilio Estevez starred with AC/DC providing the soundtrack against a budget around $10 million. King proved remarkably honest about what went wrong, admitting he'd been under the influence throughout production and didn't know what he was doing. On the KingCast podcast, he elaborated that heavy drinking marked that period and viewers could tell. On-set translator Roberto Croce recalled King drinking beers at 6 in the morning and reaching his 10th by 8:30. A serious accident marred production when cinematographer Armando Nanuzzi asked King to remove a lawnmower blade that wasn't visible in a shot. King insisted the blade remain for authenticity. The machine went out of control, and wood splinters permanently cost Nanuzzi his right eye. 2 weeks later, he returned to work wearing an eye patch, and a lawsuit settled for nearly $1 million in 1992. Casting brought its own troubles. King originally wanted Bruce Springsteen for the lead, but De Laurentiis didn't know who Springsteen was and hired Estevez instead, which disillusioned King from his own project. Estevez revealed that King has repeatedly apologized over the years, asking, "Can you forgive me for that?" Estevez's mother once asked why he did the movie, and when he explained he wanted to work with Stephen King, she responded, he could have just helped paint his house. Washington Post critics wrote that King proved he possessed no visual style and less sense than God gave a grapefruit. King himself calls it a moron movie, and when asked on social media about his favorite disaster movie, he simply replied, "Maximum Overdrive." Nearly 40 years later, he's kept his promise to never direct again. Purple Rain had grossed $72 million against a $7 million budget, so Warner Bros. Gave Prince total creative freedom for his follow-up. Under the Cherry Moon proved that trust misplaced. Prince fired director Mary Lambert after disagreements about the film's direction, and because filming took place in Europe, he could take over without violating Directors Guild rules against actors replacing directors. Color photography became black and white in post-production for supposed elegance, and Kristen Scott Thomas made her film debut alongside Jerome Benton. MTV held a contest for the premiere, and winner Lisa Barber brought it to Sheridan, Wyoming, where an estimated 2 million people watched live. Prince staged a concert at the local Holiday Inn afterward. Critics destroyed everything about it. Siskel and Ebert both gave thumbs down, and the Sunday Telegraph wrote that Prince seemed out of his depth as an actor, though too arrogant to understand why. Razzies proved brutal that year. Under the Cherry Moon tied for Worst Picture with Howard the Duck, marking the first tie in Razzie history, while Prince collected both Worst Actor and Worst Director. Jerome Benton won Worst Supporting Actor, and Lover Money took Worst Original Song. Scott Thomas later reflected that she'd been more afraid of not working than of the material being offered, adding that her first film proved exactly what she meant. Prince wrote her a song in 2009 titled Better With Time, apparently acknowledging the rough start. Parade went double platinum as a soundtrack album despite the film's failure, and many fans remain unaware it accompanied a movie at all. Madonna and Sean Penn had married just 5 months before filming began in Hong Kong and Macau, and Shanghai Surprise became a nightmare from day one. Photographers inundated the set by day 2. Penn demanded the publicist get fired, then punched paparazzi on multiple occasions, spat on one, and threw a chair through the producer's window. George Harrison flew to Hong Kong to mediate the constant conflicts. Chinese gangsters reportedly sabotaged equipment and demanded money to prevent accidents, even holding up Penn and Madonna and demanding payment for them to pass onto set. Co-star Clyde Kusatsu recalled that while Penn would jump into water for scenes, Madonna refused entirely, requiring Evian to make her look wet on camera. Harrison later called Penn a pain and noted Madonna lacked humor for a comedy. He compared the experience to The Producers, where everything went wrong, and admitted the stress made him start smoking again, something that may have contributed to his passing from cancer at age 58. Disastrous test screenings prompted MGM to slash advertising and avoid major markets for 3 weeks, and an executive admitted interest simply didn't exist. $15 million produced barely $2 million in returns. Madonna collected Worst Actress at the Razzies, and her film career stalled until Evita a decade later. Penn didn't achieve career resurrection until the mid-1990s, while director Jim Goddard didn't make another film for 11 years. Ridley Scott's fantasy epic starring Tom Cruise, Mia Sara, and Tim Curry faced catastrophe when fire broke out on June 27, 1984, completely destroying the elaborate forest set at Pinewood Studios. $700,000 had built that set, featuring 60-foot California redwood trees, streams, and waterfalls. Exploding gas cylinders used for campfire effects fed the flames, 2 workers suffered burns, and the entire 007 stage required demolition and rebuilding. Most forest scenes had already been filmed with only 11 days of shooting remaining, which saved the production from total collapse. Post-production created 2 different versions that confused audiences. Europe received a 113-minute cut with Jerry Goldsmith's orchestral score in August 1985, while America waited until April 1986 for an 89-minute version featuring Tangerine Dream's synth-pop score. Scott explained that European audiences accepted subtleties while America preferred broader strokes. Tim Curry's performance as the Demon Darkness required hours of makeup application by Rob Bottin, and despite mixed reviews for the film, his villain remains acclaimed as cinema's definitive on-screen depiction of Satan. Gene Siskel stated he wanted to remember nothing about Legend except including it on his worst films list. Tom Cruise distanced himself from the project, telling Rolling Stone his performance counted as just another color in a Ridley Scott painting, before declaring he'd never do another picture like it. He's declined discussing the film for years since. $25 million of budget returned just $15 million domestically, though a 2002 director's cut sparked reassessment and critics now consider the film underrated. John Carpenter quit Hollywood forever because of Big Trouble in Little China, an action comedy blending martial arts and fantasy that starred Kurt Russell, Kim Cattrall, and Dennis Dunn. Fox reportedly pulled it from theaters after only 6 days. Studio executives rushed production to beat Eddie Murphy's similarly themed The Golden Child, and Carpenter questioned how 2 adventure films dealing with Chinese mysticism could appear simultaneously, finding it more than coincidence. Fox maintained a hard rule of spending only $3 million on marketing regardless of production cost, so the $25 million film received minimal promotion. The campaign asked, "Who is Jack Burton?" about a character nobody knew, and on the DVD commentary, Carpenter and Russell mock this approach openly. Posters emphasized Russell's muscles while hiding that he played a bumbling sidekick, and Dennis Dunn served as the true hero. Executives demanded Carpenter add an opening scene to make Russell more heroic, proving they fundamentally misunderstood their own film. Carpenter's response came definitive and final. That experience explained why he stopped making studio films and would never work for them again. Calling Big Trouble a wonderful film he remained proud of, while admitting the reception proved too much. He hated authority too much and felt too old for that nonsense. His next 2 films came independently produced. VHS and cable television gave the film new life, and Entertainment Weekly praised the DVD for delving into Fox's marketing mishaps. Today, it holds a certified fresh rating and appears on Empire's 500 Greatest Movies list. George Lucas believed Howard the Duck would save him financially, but instead it became 1986's most notorious disaster and accidentally created Pixar in the process. $37 million went into the budget, nearly matching the entire original Star Wars trilogy combined. Top Gun that same year cost only $15 million for comparison. Lucas wanted animation, but Universal's contract required live-action delivery. Robin Williams took the voice role but quit after 1 week, unable to match the animatronic duck's movements while feeling confined and handcuffed by the technical limitations. 7 different performers wore duck suits throughout production, and technology severely limited what Howard could express on screen. Siskel gave 1 star, complaining the duck wasn't likable, and effects looked less impressive than a birthday sparkler. Both Siskel and Ebert included it on their Worst of 1986 television special, and the Razzies named it Worst Picture alongside Under the Cherry Moon. Lucas carried deep debt from Skywalker Ranch construction and divorce proceedings that required surrendering half his assets. Howard was supposed to restore his finances, but failure forced him to sell assets instead. His computer animation division went to Steve Jobs for $10 million, and that division became Pixar. Universal's chairman resigned shortly after, prompting Variety's headline, Duck Cooks Price's Goose. Director Willard Huyck never directed again, and Leah Thompson immediately took another role to prove employability. Howard the Duck's failure literally created one of entertainment's most successful companies. 1986 wasn't just a bad year for Hollywood. It became a catastrophe that reshaped the entire industry, collapsing De Laurentiis Entertainment Group, Cannon Films, and Goldcrest under the weight of these disasters while destroying careers that seemed bulletproof. Here's what nobody expected. Many of these failures became beloved cult classics over time. Big Trouble in Little China now appears on greatest films lists, Legend received a celebrated director's cut, and Howard the Duck's failure created Pixar. Box office performance in 1986 didn't determine lasting legacy. Sometimes the movie's audiences reject become treasured by future generations, and these 13 disasters cost hundreds of millions while giving us stories we're still telling 4 decades later.